Hello, Derek.
Good day. How are you?
I'm well, and yourself?
Same here. 2 feet and a heartbeat.
Yeah. So, how are you feeling after last week's episode?
Well,
Or last time's episode?
yeah, I always find true crime in and of itself difficult. The particular nature of those crimes and the perpetrators and the hate that unfolded at Sizzlers that night really stayed with me. And I know particularly the day we recorded, I had a few nightmares that night. But I will say that since I've been anticipating this third episode, I want to hear about how it all plays out. I want to hear about the investigation, and I'm just hoping that justice is served.
Yes. I've been reading back to my past, reading back to my original script for my podcast, and I realized how much I had blocked out because it was just so intense. And when I was creating the episode guide for this week, I realized just how much the story needs to be told. It needs to not be forgotten.
Yeah, no question.
So yes.
That would be the second tragedy in all of this. For this to be forgotten. So as I've said to you before, the work that you've always done is admirable, because you always put victims first, and you never let people forget the hatred that exists out there.
Exactly. So, okay. You're here. Amy's in the control room. So, hi, Amy. And let's get into the disclaimer.
Yeah. Okay.
So, the show dives into brutal, often deeply queerphobic crimes, and we don't really water things down. If graphic violence, systemic injustice, or hearing the truth about homophobia makes you uncomfortable, consider this your cue to note out now. And if you're here to troll, moralize, or defend bigotry in any form, log off, go touch some grass, and maybe rethink your life choices. For everyone else, get comfy, and let's tell the stories that the world tried to bury.
I will say that I love the way you've drafted that disclaimer.
Okay, so before we dive in, I want to take a moment to address this exchange from episode 2. If you can just play the clip. We have a tendency to give things a name, and then we become known for that. For example, racism has been a thing all over the world, and segregation has been a thing all over the world. We called it apartheid.
Right.
That has become a worldwide known term. Corrective rape seems to be the same thing. It may happen elsewhere in the world, but we gave it a name, and we now own this horror. Okay, so we got a comment relating to that. Basically, the comment said apartheid is not just racism. It was brutal oppression of the bulk of the population. You seem to be very shocked by prejudice against the LGBT community, and then at the same time dismissive of the brutal suffering of most of the population, which was legislated by law. Now, I feel I need to respond to this. So, Derek, give me a moment while I just deal with this. First of all, I want to get something straight. I never dismissed apartheid. And when I read the comment, I actually kind of took serious issue with the implication that I did. What I actually said, and as you saw in the clip, South Africa has a habit of naming our horrors. We didn't invent racism or segregation, but we gave it a name. And because of that, we own it. The name is now used globally to describe systems of structural oppression, and to suggest that I am fine with the bulk of the population being brutally oppressed. Just because I didn't mention every single atrocity of apartheid, and trust me, there are many, I think it's either a deliberate misread or a dangerously shallow one. I'm not here to debate apartheid. There is no debate to be had. The National Party took all the greatest hits of Jim Crow and Nazism and put them all together to give us this horror, this absolutely disgusting regime. And it was an all-you-can-eat buffet for white supremacy. And if anything is evident, that is still going on today. Look what happened yesterday in the White House, where Trump attacked our president for white genocide, which is not happening in South Africa. As a white South African, I can say it's not happening. The US government recently welcomed white South African refugees into America, while it's sending black and brown people to a South American gulag. And the other thing I wanted to address was, I'm not shocked by anti-LGBT prejudice instead of apartheid. What shocks me, what upsets me, is that they often work hand in hand. Racism, apartheid wasn't just racial. It was institutionalized control. And that control extended to queerness, gender, language, religion, and bodily autonomy. And since we're naming things, talk about naming things, let's revisit the other horror I was speaking about, where I said that we named it and we own it. The term corrective rape was coined in South Africa in the early 2000s by the South African feminist activist Bernadette Mutin during an interview with Human Rights Watch. And it describes the brutal practice of raping lesbians in an attempt to fix their sexuality. And it got its name because it happens so often here. And it's so violent that we had to give it language. So I didn't minimize apartheid. I showed how deep its rot goes. I traced the continuity from sanctioned race-based violence to straight up queer neglect. So not enough has been done to prevent corrective rape, just like not enough has been done to combat racism. The whole reason white supremacy is on the rise is because America would rather vote for Christo-fascism that has been on the rise since the 1980s and the rise of the Heritage Foundation than putting an intelligent, competent, unapologetically ambitious brown lady in the White House. And this has given racists and homophobes and transphobes and misogynists a permission structure to let fly their bigot flag high. So no, I didn't diminish apartheid. But if the fact that I am focusing on queer oppression on a channel called A Crime Most Queer, on a live stream series called Hate, is an issue, then perhaps this is not the channel for you.
You got it. Look, it is amazing how timely everything seems after Trump's comments yesterday. But look, you don't need anybody to stand up and defend you. But that comment was ridiculous, and somebody was just looking for to pick a fight to try and increase their visibility. And look, that was just about people hearing what they want to hear. And that's it. That was way overblown. And I'm glad you put them in their place.
Thank you. Okay. I just want to throw out a quick shout out to our sponsor, DreamStream. As longtime fans know, we record from here at DreamStream, and the professionalism is beyond compare. They're about video production, live streaming, podcasts, and music production, and they bring your projects to life with world-class equipment and a state-of-the-art studio. They also can film out in the wild. When I started out doing ACMQ as a YouTube channel, I tried recording from home, and you just can't beat the difference that a studio makes. And if you need a comparison, go and look at the very first episode I posted on ACMQ. It is shocking. But I just want to say a shout out to DreamStream for welcoming us into their studio. And now, with that all out of the way, let's get on to Sizzlers.
Yeah.
There's a link to DreamStream. There'll be a link to DreamStream down in the description. Right. So, previously on hate. The last time we peeled back the curtain on one of the most horrifying crimes in South African history, the Sizzlers Massacre. We went back to Cape Town in 2003, a city that was living two lives. On the one side, you had the glitz, the glamour, the fabulous, holiday hotspot, and on the other side, you had a city that was dealing with bombs and rising tension and all sorts of things going on. And in the middle of this, you had Sizzlers, a place where outsiders, people from around the country, found a family, and where men came to feel safe and seen, even if only for a moment. We honored the 9 lives lost, teenagers with dreams, immigrants from around the country, activists, survivors, men who were lovers, sons, brothers, people. And we also honored the one who survived, Quentin Taylor, who told the tale.
Yeah.
We introduced the killers, Adam Woest and Trevor, not hardened criminals, but also not gangsters. Just 2 unremarkable men who committed an unimaginable crime. So, on the 19th of January, they put their plan into action after hearing about a supposed safe in Sizzlers containing vast sums of money. And they arrived at 7 Graham Road with gloves, rope, tape, loaded guns, and even balaclavas. They bought 2 liters of petrol in a plastic bottle at a service station, which they brought along as well. And then just after midnight, they walked in through the gates of 7 Graham Road.
God.
Inside, it started like just any other booking. But within minutes, the facade was shattered. Guns were drawn, victims tied, gagged, and tortured. We walked through those final moments where throats were slit, bodies were doused in petrol, and then they were all shot execution style. 10 lives destroyed, 9 dead, 1 barely clinging to life. We heard from the first responders. Nick Nevin, who was there on the night. He'd seen horror before, but that night left him speechless. The smell of blood, the silence, the scrutiscare, the feeling that no one was safe anymore. By morning, the killers had vanished into the night. The city lay in shock, and Quentin, battered but breathing,
thank the Lord
to carry the truth to court.
That's Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your thought, but that's the one thing that ruminated or one of the things that ruminated with me afterwards. As trying as that was, thankfully he was there to tell the tale and to assist in justice. Well, what I hope is justice.
And that's actually where we pick up. Okay, so we're going to go through the manhunt, the arrests, the trial, and the long shadow that the massacre still casts today. So this is the final chapter. Let's get into it.
Okay.
But before we do, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, and it really helps get our content into the algorithm. And with that said, let's dive in. And we'll start with the investigation. News of the massacre spread nationally and internationally. Early theories emerged. There was Juan de Val Ace, who came up with multiple, often conflicting claims. There was Superintendent Jeremy Veery, who headed up the Cape Town's gang task force, and he posited that it was a gangland hit by a Cape Town gang called the 28th. He claimed that Aubrey was infringing on the 28th turf, and he believed it resembled other gang hits. However, Captain Etienne Treblanche, who headed up the Western Cape's police force, refuted the gang theory publicly, emphasizing there were more key differences than there were key similarities from a typical gang execution. For one, the prolonged control over the victims. They were there for 3 hours. He also said that the victims were tied, gagged, and methodically executed, whereas in Cape Town, the attitude to a gang hit is basically walk in, spray and pray, and take people out. So, but there were a lot of theories and questions because nobody understood why this had happened. There doesn't seem to be any reason.
NJ, was Quentin? I know he was found at the petrol station down the road where he fled to after the perpetrators left. Was he lucid and able to describe events from the get-go, or were there points where he was, inaccessible to law enforcement?
For a long time, and we'll get into it. He was inaccessible to law enforcement because he was shot twice in the face.
Oh man!
And so his jaw was practically shattered. He had a bullet that went through his ear canal, and again with the slit throat, and that he was taken from the service station to Somerset Hospital, which is near the waterfront, where he was treated, and then he was moved from the waterfront to Curtis Gear, where he underwent an operation, or I think actually multiple operations.
Right.
But he was unable to be interviewed. But let me not throw away too many spoilers because we are going to get back to that.
Okay.
Juan de Val Ace, the leader of the Gay and Lesbian Alliance political party, he stuck himself into the he pushed himself into the case for whatever reason, whether he was trying to boost the profile of his political party, or if he was just trying to coast on the horror that is that was the case. Who knows? I have my theories, but more on that later. He first said it was a hate crime and that it was motivated by hate. Then he said that Aubrey, the owner of Sizzlers, was involved in the drug trade, and he got taken out by fellow drug dealers. Then he said that Warren Fisser, one of the men killed, had warned him of a conspiracy that was happening, but didn't actually give him any details. Then he also alleged that he'd received threats from someone who believed that he was the owner of Sizzlers. Then he claimed that the men had died there because of him, that it was his fault because people were after him as a politician. Then he claimed that he was accosted in his home by a known criminal. None of these things could ever be corroborated. Nothing ever came of it. He said that he phoned Sizzlers. There's no record was ever found of him making a phone call. So there was just he just seemed to get into this, try and get into the story as much as he could, for whatever reason.
That's amazing to me. This is a new name, and to give this many versions of a story and to try and insert yourself in so many different ways, that's a serious red flag.
Mm-hmm.
I know you're going to unpack it more, but I can't wait to understand this person Juan's motives.
Okay, so this happened on the 20th. A few days later, the funerals start to happen. Okay, the street in front of Sizzlers became an absolute, a place of vigil. Every night, 2 candles were placed on either side of the gate, and they burned into the night. The pavement in front of the house was filled with flowers, and there were cards stuck in addressed to the victims. And as the week went by, so fewer people arrived, came to pay their respects. But there was one neighbor who would turn her hose pipe onto the flowers every day, just so that they could stay fresh for a little longer.
That's amazing.
So, despite all of the stigma that goes with it, that seemed to go right out the window for the people who lived in and around Graham Road.
Right.
They didn't really give a shit that what they did for a living. They just, they wanted to be there for. They wanted to show their compassion.
That to me is an exceptional note of humanity in such an inhuman situation. And I will note too that, I don't recall these sort of makeshift shrines at crime scenes really becoming that big a thing until right around this time. I remember when Princess Diana died a few years prior to this, there was that. But this was clearly something that rang through the community. And despite any stigma, they wanted to say, to demonstrate their compassion. And I surmise that was in an attempt to push back on society as a whole and to say collectively that this is wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And okay, so while all that's going on, the police set up a hotline, which pretty much became flooded with calls. Everybody was trying to, show how they, try and give even the slightest bit of information to, to hopefully point someone in the right direction. And the only problem with that is the more information you get, the more you have to discount.
Yeah, you have to chase down every lead.
So there were a few early leads. One was that the police initially said that they were looking for 4 men in a white BMW 3 Series with Gauteng plates. So basically from Johannesburg. There was a belief that 4 men had been seen in the pink on the pink strip looking for 2 rent boys by the name of Marawan and Stephen, who apparently were former employees of Sizzlers who had gone back to Gauteng and had gone back to Joburg and had a run-in with a Johannesburg gang called the Fast Guns. Now, the Fast Guns were based in Westbury, which is on the west side of Johannesburg. And the theory was that the gang sent hitmen down to that Marawan and Stephen fell afoul of this gang, and then they fled back to Cape Town, and then the Fast Guns sent 4 hitmen down to Cape Town, and they went to Sizzlers, and they basically, assuming that the boys had gone, that these 2 rent boys had gone back there, and when they weren't there, they then tortured the boys at Sizzlers, and to try and get information on who this Marawan and Stephen were.
Seems like a stretch.
They released subject descriptions. The first one was white, bleached reddish hair, goatee tattoo, coiled snake, and Fast Guns tattoo. The second one was thin, white male, constantly sniffing, possibly due to cocaine use. The third was tall, white, muscular, with a shaven head. And the fourth was white and well built. Okay. One problem though. Robbie Adams, who was an ex-member of the Fast Guns in the 1970s, went, no. First of all, the gang no longer exists. Secondly, in Westbury, which is this area of Johannesburg that was historically for the colored community, anyone who carries a gun is now known as a fast gun. Okay. The other thing is the Fast Guns never worked off their own turf, and they didn't allow anybody onto their own turf. So why would they have sent someone from Johannesburg to Cape Town onto someone else's turf to commit a hit? And
was this an effort to just sort of distract or minimize what had gone on here, and to say this is just a bunch of bad actors? This is.
I think that was the goal. I think that was the goal. They personally, okay, and this is just me personally, I feel that they wanted to wrap this thing up as quickly as they could, give it a nice little bow and be done with it, because Cape Town is notorious for gang violence,
right? And
this was a good scapegoat, but shit didn't tie up, because the most telling issue with the Fast Guns theory was the Fast Guns only accepted colored members. And the suspects that were sent to Cape Town, they were all white. So anyway, all of a sudden, without any explanation, without any hint of, okay, they discounted it. Any mention of fast guns just disappeared completely out of the media. It's just like, it's not like somebody said, no, it's we've discounted it. It just, there was absolute radio silence on that theory. So we don't actually know what happened there. On the 23rd of January, 3 days after the killing, we had the funeral of Aubrey Otgar, who was the owner of Sizzlers at the St. Anthony's Catholic Church. The 24th of January, Gregory Berghaus died of his injuries. He was the only victim that was not employed at Sizzlers. He was the client who was with Sergio, and the one who charged Trevor. I think it was Trevor. Being Jewish, he was buried the next day at the Pinelands Jewish Cemetery, and then on the following Saturday, there was a memorial service held at the Holy Redeemer Anglican Church, and it was co-hosted by the African National Congress, the Gay and Lesbian Equality Project. Now, okay, just to clarify, the African National Congress at that stage, if memory serves, was still running the city of Cape Town metro. But ANC, the Gay and Lesbian Equality Project, the Sex Workers Education and Advocacy Task Force, or SWET, and the Triangle Project, they got together and they organized this memorial service at the Holy Redeemer Anglican Church in Greenpoint. And, one thing I forgot to mention, when all of this happened, Juan de Waal Ace claimed that he and the leadership of the Gay and Lesbian Alliance fled Cape Town because, after all, he was attacked in his house, and he believed that he was a threat. And who should pitch up at the service? Juan de Waal Ace and another guy by the name of Joe Chauke, who was apparently the first vice president of the Gay and Lesbian Alliance. And they arrived, but they then left in protest and made sure they made a noise about it. So saying that the ANC was turning it into a political rally because there were people up on the stage discussing, giving messages while wearing ANC branded shirts. The ANC turned around and said, you know what, actually, seriously, outside 7 Graham Road, it has been awash with Gay and Lesbian Alliance pamphlets, so shut the fuck up. And then finally, we had the final service in Cape Town, which was on the 27th of January, and that was the Requiem Mass for Sergio de Castro at St. Mary's Cathedral. Now, the Quentin is now is now getting better in hospital, and finally he's able to speak. Now I have a snippet from Elsie Britz's the journalist. I have a snippet from her interview. If we could just play that, please.
And it was only thanks to Quentin that they were caught. But he was actually the policeman who was leading the investigation. He was fantastic, and he went to the hospital week after week after week to hear if Quentin has recovered, so that he can identify someone. And what he actually did, and this was really, really, you can't think that it was actually possible. He brought in books with pictures of suspects in it, but they didn't know at all who could have been the suspects. And in this picture book, there was an old photograph of Trevor Tays, And we saw the photograph in court. He doesn't look at all the same. It was so old, and he had one minor trespass in the past. He actually stole his sister's car without her permission, and she was so angry, she laid a charge against him. And there was this picture of him, very young, with a big afro. He didn't look the same at all. And through all these pages, as I went through hundreds, Quentin was able to recognize him, and he said, "That's the guy who shot me." Lo and behold, they go to his sister, who still lives at the same address after all these years. It's like 30 years ago or something. And she said, "Yeah, that's my brother." They go to his address and they arrest him the same day. And then he said who Woest was, and they could make an arrest.
And that's basically how it happened.
Kind of a fluke.
Quentin was finally improving, and Detective Jonathan Morris was at the hospital pretty much every single day. So is he okay? Is he okay? Is he okay? There he is there. That's Detective Morris at the crime scene. And finally, when Quentin is able to speak, Detective Morris goes there. He interviews him, and then shows him a book of mugshots. And if I'm not mistaken, there's actually a photo of the old mugshot from when he stole the car. And as Elsby said, it looks nothing like him. It looks nothing like him as he was then. The photo you just saw now, that was taken when he was arrested for the Sizzlers crime. But yes, so he interviews, he identifies Trevor Tace, and cops arrive at his sister's house, and Elsby said that he was staying elsewhere. According to what I found is that he was actually living with his sister at the same time. That's the house there that he was arrested at. And he cooperates with the police, and he actually even takes them out to Woest to go and show them where he dismantled the guns, but nothing was ever found of that. And he also identifies Adam Woest and gives them the address, which was the Bordeaux apartments right across the road from 7 Graham Road.
So this was really, outstanding police work. This was sort of fishing. There was no physical evidence that they'd found. There was no fingerprints to tie these people. Like, this was literally just doing the work of sifting and sorting through mugshots that led to one arrest, which led to a confession and to a second arrest. Bravo.
I must say, I'm not sure if I actually included that segment, but in Elsby's full interview that I've been breaking up, she actually said that had it not been for him being so diligent, this wouldn't actually have been solved at all.
Wow.
So it was just luck. It was just lucky that Quentin was able to look at because at that stage the photograph of Trevor was 10 years old. So the fact that Quentin was able to recognize someone who is 10 years old, 10 years younger, and go, that's the guy.
Wow.
Is just, as I say, it was just really, really, really fortunate because
Can you imagine the moment when Quentin, maybe has to squint, looks at this thing or recognizes something, and then the reality of it would wash over him after looking at what I presume are hundreds or thousands of mugshots. That must have been what felt like an impossible task. All of a sudden it's like trying different keys in a lock and none of them fit. And after 1,000, you put one in and the door unlocks. And I can only imagine what that revelation felt like.
Absolutely. And this was 2003. So it would have been manual work going through. You can't just sit in front of a computer and go get a whole, display and go, okay, fine. And then you had to manually, physically sit and page and page and page.
Wow. Mental fortitude that would take to stay focused and stay committed to that, because they would all seem the same after a while. And the process must have been eminently difficult and boring.
Absolutely. So Trevor was arrested on the 13th of February, and he gives them Adam's address, and the cops go off to Bordeaux Apartments, ring the buzzer for the apartment, and a woman answers the bell. And they go, we're policemen, we're here, we are looking for Adam Woest. Can we have a word? She goes, yeah, sure, come on upstairs. And they explain to her why they are looking for Adam, that he is in connection with, now the woman they are speaking to is Adam's fiance, Adele, and they say to her that he is wanted in connection with the Sizzlers Massacre, well, the murder of Sizzlers. And she cannot believe it. She is totally flummoxed. Yeah, Adam has always been a very quiet, very soft-spoken, very reserved person. And when she came back from Johannesburg, because she was in Johannesburg when it all happened, as you recall, she said that he seemed a little more reserved than possible, but not, she would have noticed that most people wouldn't have. But he started wearing his hair differently, and he started wearing his glasses almost permanently, which he didn't before. So she is shocked. She's distraught. She can't believe that he would be involved in this. And she says he works at the waterfront at a restaurant called Key 4, which is a very popular tourist restaurant, a very popular restaurant at the waterfront. And so police go off to the waterfront. They get there, and being the night, even though it's the night before Valentine's Day, the restaurant is packed. Detective Morris goes up to the hostess and says, could you please point out Adam Woest to me? And she goes, that would be him there. And he walks up to Adam Woest and says, thank you very much. You're coming with me. Right. You're being arrested for murder.
Wow.
And yeah, so
he doesn't look very friendly.
Nope, he does not. He, as was come out in the trial, which we'll get to in a moment, he he's never he always gave an impression of, not quite disdain, but just totally not, couldn't give a shit.
Yeah.
So they were arrested on the 13th of February. Usually in South Africa, trials take about a year to get from arrest to prosecution. It takes about a year. Some trials can actually be longer, much longer. between arrest and getting to court for various reasons. But I think there was a motivation by the legal fraternity to get this show on the road.
Right.
And try and figure out what the hell actually happened. And because the anniversary of the Sizzlers Massacre, the Cape Argus, I think it was, interviewed some of the family. Greg Berghouse's mother, Faye, said that she would never be able to forgive them, and that she doesn't understand how the families of victims can forgive the killer of their loved one. And Stephanus Fischer, the 17-year-old Ryan, he also spoke to the press, and he said that he struggled to reconcile what his son was doing there. Right. He didn't want to accept that his son was there for what he was doing. And so basically he told himself that Fani, as he called him, was there to fix the computers on a Sunday, a Monday morning at midnight. But anyway.
Well, it's easy to be critical of people, but until you walk a mile in their shoes.
But one thing he did say is that regardless of why his son was there, what his son was doing, he was always he was and will always be proud of him.
Well, good. That's a nice little touch.
So yes, I don't actually knock any of the family or families for wanting to not address that aspect of the crime, because if it was my kid, I would be more focused on my kid is dead, not what was my kid doing when they died.
Well said.
Okay, so Quentin Taylor recovered, and because they didn't know who was behind it and all that, and they didn't know if there was other people involved or any of that, he was put into witness protection, and he went to an unidentified house somewhere in the greater Cape Town area, and for 13 months he was there pretty much on his own.
Oh boy.
And he said that it messed with his mental health terribly, because all he wanted to do was go home to his family. He was adopted. He had a troubled youth. He finally came to his adopted parents later than usual. And he didn't really fit in, which understandable. I know my mother, who is also adopted, said that fitting in is one of the hardest things to do when you're adopted, because you just don't feel like you actually fit in anywhere.
Wow.
You question why your birth parents gave you away. You are waiting for your adopted family to give you away. There's a lot of trust issues and all of that. But I think his father's name was Greg Taylor. He has always shown himself in all the interviews and all the documentaries that have been made on it. He's shown himself to be a very caring father. Yes, but maybe a little stern, but fathers are fathers. He would have been a boomer parent, so they were raised different.
Yeah.
But he was always supportive of Quentin. And I think the time in isolation, Quentin realized, hang on, I actually want to go back to my family. I want to be with my family. I don't want to be just me. And so he used those 30 months to, as he said, reflect on his life, on his past, and on his future. So the trial started on the 2nd of February 2004. It was presided over by Judge Nathan Erasmus, with Anthony Stevens as the state prosecutor, and the defense advocates of Morna Carlitz and Christopher Riker for Adam and Trevor, respectively. The very first thing that that Advocate Stevens said is these guys need to go off to Falkenberg Hospital, which is a psychiatric hospital for awaiting trial prisoners. They need to make sure that they are both capable of standing trial. The defense agrees. Off they go. Judge Erasmus says, "All well and good. You have a month. We need to get this done and dusted. You have a month," which is, from what I've been told by lawyers and things like that, is unheard of these days. It may be impossible back then, but the backlog these days is astronomical.
So they went right to the front of the line in an effort to expedite this case. Is that because the judge was just so? Is that because the very nature of the crime, the very how sensational it was, and how big a media event it was?
I think so. I think they wanted the judge, as much as the public and the families, wanted answers, and I think if you look at how he presided over the trial, you could see that his goal was to give the family the answers they needed.
Wow. Well, it's so often that families are forgotten in these processes. So that's remarkable to me. I mean, trying to get any government state, especially justice, which grinds very, very slow in most places, for them to do anything within a month, let alone just the administration and the paperwork, is shocking. I'm glad to hear of one of these rare success stories where justice is expedient.
Yeah. So they agree. They go off to Falkenberg. The judge basically says, just make sure that you don't that you actually commit to the process, and cooperate, and says to the team, just make sure that you assess as swiftly as you possibly can. While they are in Falkenberg Hospital, Trevor's lawyer quits. He goes, "I'm not doing this anymore because I cannot defend my client, because his story keeps changing. So I'm out." And he was then later replaced by Nehemiah Bullin, who is a character. He's made the papers a few times. One showing up drunk at court, and I think he also there's a lovely phrase in Cape Town, which I'm going to say because, well, YouTube doesn't understand Afrikaans. So it's called "Yo Masapus."
No, could you, for the Canadians on this in this conversation, could you translate?
Okay, yes. How I generally translate it: "Your mommy's pink bits."
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, I know what that is. Yeah, I'm familiar with that term.
Apparently, at one stage, he actually said that to a judge.
Oh my!
So yeah, he was, like I said, he's been a character. But anyway,
colorful.
Absolutely. But yeah, so they're now in they're off to the psychiatric hospital. After the appearance, media obviously is outside being, paparazzi will paparazzi, and they go to Peter Versfeld, who is Aubrey Otkar's stepfather, and say, "What was it like to look the killer of your son in the eyes?" And he goes, "No, not up to me to look them in the eyes. They need to look me in the eyes," and explains to me why they did this to my son. I may be his stepfather, but he feels like flesh and blood to me.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, the press coverage on the trial was, it was sensational, and not in a, not so sensational as in they made shit up, but there was a lot being reported on, and this was one of the easiest cases to get information on the trial. Often you really struggle to get information on the trial because well, that was a boring day in court, so we're not going to cover that, and some of the important details kind of get lost.
Mm-hmm.
Not with this one. There was international coverage. I found things, New York Times, BBC, The Guardian, and then of course our local press houses. So the trial was postponed until the 3rd of March, and then they were back in court to give their plea. Trevor pleaded guilty to 9 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder, 1 count of robbery with aggravating circumstances, 1 firearm theft, 1 illegal firearm, and 1 illegal possession of illegal ammunition.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Adam he pleaded guilty to 7 of the murders, saying that he didn't have anything to do with Sergio and Gregory Berghaus. He also admitted to one count of attempted murder for Quinton, and then the same robbery and weapons charges. And Judge Erasmus decided to invoke Section 113 of the Criminal Procedures Act. Now, I'm going to read an abridged version of the statute. If a court at any stage of if a court, i.e. a judge, at any stage of the proceedings and before sentence is passed, is in doubt whether the accused is in law guilty of the offence to which he or she has pleaded guilty, or that the accused has a valid defence to the charge, or if the court is of the opinion, for any other reason, that the accused plea of guilty should not stand, the court shall record a plea of not guilty and require the prosecutor to proceed with the prosecution. Now, let's translate that into English. First of all, the judge said, "I don't believe your pleas are valid." He was concerned that the accused, Trevor and Adam, may be claiming false responsibility or they acted under duress. Both had claimed that they had been acting out of fear of the other one. And that, in South African law, is a defense of necessity.
Huh.
Also, the prosecution was saying, we don't believe their stories. We can't be certain that one or both of them isn't lying. And so the judge said, right, I'm entering a plea of not guilty for both of you, and let's go ahead with the trial. They pleaded guilty, but the defense and the judge were uncertain of their guilt. And so,
I just want to ask a question. I'm sorry to interrupt, but about a procedure. They each have their defense teams, I assume the defendants are kept segregated and can't collaborate. But do the defense lawyers, do the defense teams, do they collaborate and strategize, or are they more or less almost inherently segregated because they could fight against one another or try to pin blame on the other?
They did try and keep they did keep each other separate.
Okay.
They did not work together. In fact, as we will get to, Trevor wanted to be moved to a different prison from Adam at one stage. But I'll get to that in a bit.
Mm-hmm.
The trial then proceeds, and they start to call witnesses for the prosecution. They start with a guy by the name of Mark Hamilton. Now, you'll remember Mark Hamilton as the second client to arrive, who then discovered the bodies. Now, he arrived on the scene at 3:14 a.m., where and on the stand he described discovering the bodies, and he got out of the taxi, walked in, saw that things weren't quite like it should be, and then walked into the house, saw that the door was open for the dorm room.
The dorm, yeah.
Stuck his head in there, saw 5 bodies, and then carried on walking further up the passage, and then came to Studio 1, where he saw Sergio crumpled up on the floor, leaning against a dresser or a sideboard. He bolts out and he bolts out into the street, and then runs down Graham Road to funny enough, the road that Nick Nevin would drive down not long afterwards. And he runs up the road to the nearest service station, which happens to be the Total service station, where Quentin has just walked in, bloody and broken. And the police have been called by the service station. They arrive. Mark Hamilton gets to the police and says, "Okay, yeah, that may be something, maybe warning, but you need to come and see this."
Right.
And he then leads them back down to Sizzlers, and they then take him inside so that he can show them what he did, what he saw. And I think also to make sure that he wasn't just someone trying to cover their tracks.
With the extent of it, his injuries at that point, could Quentin talk? I know he looked a mess, so therefore you would call the police, you would call an ambulance, medical services, but he wasn't trying to point them back down the hill, was he?
I don't know. I don't know if he could speak. His balance was off because he had been shot through the ear. Yeah. His jaw was pretty much hanging at a weird angle. Oh. So I'm not entirely sure if he was able to communicate details.
Right. God.
So
trauma.
It was just it was again fortunate that Mark came along when he did and was able to lead police back to the scene, but also that he went to the same place that Quentin was at to lead the police back. Things just seem to work. The fates were at least smiling on what happened afterwards. If not, absolutely, certainly not what happened before.
Absolutely.
So, when he was questioned by the prosecution how this has affected him, he said that he struggles to sleep. Every little noise wakes him. He is in therapy on meds to deal with the trauma. And he was just in constant fear for his life. Were the people who did this going to come for him next?
Wow.
The next person that got onto the stand was Darren Brick. Now, Darren was the guy who him and his girlfriend, who he called Ashley, was sitting in the car in Murray Road that was then chased by the white BMW as they got away. Okay. And he then testified that he saw these two men running out into Murray Road with balaclavas on, and they were freaking out. Him and Ashley, or Ashley specifically, was freaking out, and he drove away, and they suddenly tailed him, and then he turned, and then they turned in the opposite direction. And Ashley was actually on the phone to 112, which is the emergency services. And his plan, he said, was to go to Sea Point Police Station, but because of the adrenaline and the fright, he was unable to drive. And so when he got to Main Road, he stopped at the Total Service Station.
Wow, where everything happens.
And then the police arrived, and he went up to go and speak to them. And the police said, we have enough on our plate now. Go to the police station tomorrow.
Right.
And so he then made a formal statement at the police station and told them about the white BMW. So that explains where it came from in the early leads that the police had. Next on the stand was the guy by the name of Yaku Steyn. Now, Yaku lived in Bordeaux apartments with his partner. And he woke up to something, as we discussed last week. And then heard gunshots, ran out to the balcony, and saw two men running down the road. And then he went back to his off to bed, make coffee, whatever he was going to do. And then he heard a car pull up, and he saw Mark get out the taxi, and Mark walked in and then came running out. And then he said, I think we need to call the cops. Mm-hmm. When asked if he knew Adam Woest, he said he'd seen him on the property. They passed each other. They were friendly, but not friends. But he did recognize Adam Woest as a resident of Bordeaux apartments. And he also spoke of the nightly candlelight vigils and the community mourning. And it was him who spoke about the resident spraying the flowers with water to keep them fresh. And then we move on to the professionals. Dr. Denise Lawrence, the pathologist. Now, she, according to her reports and her testimony, Trevor's cuts were mostly superficial. They weren't very deep. But Adam's wounds, the wounds that Adam inflicted, were aggressive, and specifically in the case of Aubrey Othgar, lethal. According to Dr. Lawrence, it is likely that Aubrey was the only one that would have died relatively quickly because his carotid artery was severed. During all the testimonies, Adam showed zero emotion. Occasionally, he would look over at witnesses who were testifying, but no emotion whatsoever. Trevor, on the other hand, would look straight ahead, and he would, he showed a form of remorse.
Right.
Maybe it wasn't true remorse. Maybe he was, worried about what he was going to do, which we'll come back. We'll get back to. But he at least, showed some emotion.
He was engaged somewhat.
Yeah. But the whole time he just stared straight ahead. He didn't look at the witnesses. He didn't look at the families. Adam occasionally would turn around and look at the families.
Oh boy.
But after that first day, that is when Trevor requested that he be moved from Pollsmoor to Goodwood Prison, and the judge said, "That's not something I can do. That's not my job, but I'll pass on the request." And apparently, the request was denied. So yes. Next up on the stand was Detective Inspector Jonathan Morris. Now, I didn't find much on his testimony, but one thing that multiple articles threw up was that he said that the Sizzlers Massacre was the worst crime that he had worked in his 27 years on the force.
Wow. That's saying something. That is really saying something. That's a long career. And, you know, I understand how much violence pervades in South Africa. So for that to be the worst is really saying something.
Now, Elsie Butts, in her interview, spoke about watching the video in court, of the police video, and she actually describes it in what her as a court reporter and what the people in the court saw. We can play that video, that audiogram.
It was fun. It was early days in using media in the court and I refer to media as monitors in court in South Africa. So it was the first time that they actually showed us on a screen, on a monitor screen, the police video that was taken when they arrived at the house. You know, they say the old thing about visuals, but it was one of the most shocking things I've ever seen in my life. So the video was taken, I will never forget the timestamp, at 5 o'clock that morning when the forensic team was busy at the site. And in the background, you hear the radio is still on in the house, and the song, Tell It As It Is, was playing. And the policeman walks and he talks, and then he enters the house, and right there is a little table in the foyer with knives on, bloody knives. And then he turns left, and that's the area where the men, it's like their communal room where they, had a TV and, sat and chat. And there you see the bodies lying. And then the camera pans to the roof where there's a ceiling fan, and you can see the blood spatter up to the roof on the ceiling. And then he walks towards the kitchen, and that's where the big pool of blood lies, which we later heard that is where Mr. Berghaus was injured. And he was one of the people who survived later on, I think for about a week, and then he passed away in hospital. And then he takes you through the whole scene. And the whole time the radio is playing with music. It's so haunting. I'll never forget that.
She paints quite a picture.
Yeah. So when I was listening to that, it was having researched this case, having seen photos of the house as it is now, because currently the house is sitting on a rental website as a holiday home or a offers holiday accommodation in South Africa. And so I've seen that house. I've seen what it looks like now, and I go, oh.
Yeah.
I actually at one stage it came on the market for rent, and I actually wanted to rent it and turn it into a form of a queer safe space.
Yeah.
Until I was able to buy it, but that never quite came to pass.
Well, that says so much. That's such a fitting idea for a space that was the epicenter of such violence and such focused violence and tragedy. I can think of nothing better than to have used it that way. I mean, who would want to stay there as in a holiday accommodation if you knew what the story was?
Exactly. So, on the 9th of March, Quentin Taylor takes the stand, but as he's still in witness protection, he takes a stand under the identity of Witness 74, and he describes the studio booking procedure. Now, I think I described this back in episode 1. Basically, we used to call it the cattle auction because you would go in there, the client would phone and say, okay, this is what I'm looking for. The owner or manager on duty would say, okay, I think that boy would be good for you. And when they arrive, they go to the studio. Then we walk through and we introduce ourselves. They get to see us, and then they make their decision. Like I said, we used to call it the cattle auction.
Right.
There were some places where they'd be sitting behind a window, and the client would come and say, "Okay, I'll take that one," which that would be referred to as the fishbowl. We understood that we were just, in that moment, we were commodity.
Yeah, you're a product.
Yeah. Okay, so he confirmed the attack timeline. He also confirmed that Trevor was the more restrained of the two. That Adam was violent and volatile. He confirmed that he refused to lie down on his face, and that, as I said last time, may very well have saved his life. And as I mentioned earlier, 2 bullets entered his skull. One shattered his jaw, the other one went through his ear canal. Both were lodged in his body and had to be surgically removed. He suffered permanent damage, balance difficulties, and also he is deaf in one ear. And he spoke about what happened afterwards. After he was shot, he blacked out for a few, and then came round. Couldn't have been very much longer because he was already gone by the time Mark arrived. He checked on the guys in the room. The only person that was dead in the room with him was Aubrey. All the other guys were alive, and some were gargling for breath.
Oh my!
Which is something that Mark actually mentioned in his testimony, that the sound he heard was them breathing through blood.
Oh my!
He then went up to go and check on Sergio, found that Sergio too was dead, and then he heard a shuffle, a movement in the bathroom. Went in there, found Greg, and thought he looked okay, not realizing that Greg had a chest wound, a stomach. He had been shot in the stomach, and so he then ran out of the house, struggling to keep his balance because obviously, and managed to get to the service station where where help was then called. And again, he identified his attackers. All around the courtroom, you had a guy standing behind him with a rifle, and then around court you had plainclothes police officers, because nobody knew what could happen to Quentin, and they just
Right.
took the greatest care. However, that very night, Quentin said, "I'm done with witness freaking protection.
Wow.
I'm going home."
Yeah.
The next day, he returned to court with a name.
Wow.
He came out publicly and said, "It was me."
That's courage.
Yeah. Yes.
Amazing. Amazing.
So the defense strategy totally collapses. They don't call any witnesses. They don't call Adam or Trevor to the stand. And so the state moves into the case moves into closing arguments. The state prosecutor argues that the robberies were premeditated, and that the plan was always murder, and notes that balaclavas were worn only during the escape.
Mm.
The defense, advocate Karlitz for Adam, basically claimed that it was a spur-of-the-moment decision, and he argued that Adam wasn't present for the murder of Sergio and Gregory's murders, so therefore he can't be held liable for that. Balim,
For those two.
yeah,
Yeah.
the two that were in Studio One. Balim, advocate Balim for Trevor, didn't actually offer any real motive. But he did try to imply that there was third-party involvement because of the mysterious phone call.
Right. Oh, right.
Yeah. Then the judge says, "Okay, I will come back tomorrow with my decision." Now, I've never known in any of the cases I've covered for a decision to be made 24 hours later.
Was that because they didn't present much of a defense, and really they were hanging it on a phone call? Is that it?
That was Trevor's reason, and Trevor's lawyer gave more reason in mitigation, as we'll get to. After the case, Quentin goes out, and for the first time, he speaks to the media. He expresses relief at leaving witness protection, and the media had the audacity, let's put it that way, to ask him why he came out, considering the nature of the crime, what the victims were doing. And he went, "I am not ashamed that I worked at Sizzlers.
Wow.
I have nothing to hide.
Yeah.
The victims did nothing wrong.
Yeah.
They were humans. They had dreams, plans, and goals, and now those goals are dead. Those dreams are dead. Those plans are dead, and the family is grieving. So basically, fuck you and your prejudice."
Bravo.
On the 11th of April, the verdict was delivered. Judge Erasmus presented a 12-page judgment in which he describes the massacre again as the worst Cape Town has ever seen, and he expresses frustration that the accused never gave any explanation, saying we were left with more questions than answers. The families, including Quentin Taylor and his father, and Faye Berghaus, they were all worried. They had no idea whether whether there was going to be a mistrial, whether there was going to be whether they were going to be let off with a slap on the wrist. The verdict was an extremely difficult time for everybody because of all the question marks surrounding this case.
Mm-hmm.
Judge Erasmus found that the robbery and the murders absolutely were premeditated. Now, a quirk about South African law is we don't have a charge for a premeditated murder. It's murder. Murder is murder. Where premeditation comes in is that is in the sentencing. So it's almost like a murder with a premeditation enhancement, if I can put it that way. But yes, so he decided that the robbery was premeditated. The murders were premeditated because they didn't make any attempt to conceal their identity, and beside them actually knowing at least Aubrey, if not all the other boys, from when Adam worked at Walter's Grill.
Mm-hmm.
He also said that it was weird that the petrol and the throat slashing happened after they had the money from the safe. Surely, if you had the money, you get the hell out. But they stayed there 3 hours. They got the money, and then they needed to, and then they started the torture. Why? What was that about? He decided to totally exclude the phone call that Adam supposedly received because there was no evidence presented to substantiate this. And he said that Adam and Trevor shared a common purpose, and that premeditated murder, that their common purpose was premeditated murder with direct intent. All in all, he found Trevor guilty of firearm theft. He found both guilty of all 9 murders. He found both guilty of attempted murder, both guilty of robbery with aggravated circumstances, unlawful possession of firearms, unlawful possession of ammunition. And according to the Criminal Law Amendment of 1987, because of the premeditated murder, mandatory minimums of life sentences were required.
Which is 20 years in South Africa?
Now it's 25.
Okay. Yeah. But life doesn't mean life.
No. And that is the most frustrating part about it.
Oh my God, are they coming out soon?
We're getting to that.
Oh my Lord.
Okay, so in aggravation, Faye Berghaus reiterated her refusal to forgive, saying that she would never be able to forgive her son's killers.
It's her prerogative.
And she read out a letter from Greg's nephew that said, "I'm crying here. Why can't you speak to me?"
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think at that stage the nephew was something like 9.
Oh.
And it wasn't just, you know, Greg's mom, but Greg's sister, Greg's nephew. So many lives are ruined because of this. Also in aggravation, Dr. Sunil Anirudh, who was Quinton's maxillofacial surgeon, actually said that Quinton was lucky to be alive. It could have been 10. The other thing that we also need to keep in mind is the judge in his judgment basically said this business was a 24-hour operating business. A client could have arrived at any moment, and yet they hung out for 3 hours.
Right.
And the funny thing is, they left at 3 a.m. and at 3:15, Mark arrived. Had he arrived half an hour earlier, maybe the victim count would have been 11.
Yep. Wow.
In mitigation for Trevor, Dr. Larissa Paneri-Peter, who was a psychiatrist who assessed him, said that he showed no sign of low intelligence, violent history, or detectable homophobia. Trevor's Trevor was tearful and anxious and afraid that he was tearful and anxious and afraid due to death threats he claimed that he received while in prison from Adam. His defense claimed that he was emotionally triggered by his ex-girlfriend who left him for another woman, but the judge said, "No, that's bullshit. There is no clinical evidence." Yeah, there's no clinical evidence of a mental break.
That you're blaming it on an ex?
Yeah.
Oh, come on. Well, I suppose. I mean, they must have just been scraping for reasons and rationale. That's pretty basic.
When Trevor really showed emotion in the trial was when his sister took to the stand, and she basically said, "We can't understand. My brother would never do this." And when questioned by the prosecutor, said, "Well, if he did do this, then he needs to pay because, shit you not, to take a life is not nice."
Really?
Well, there's a masterpiece understatement.
Yeah, that's very well said. Yeah, that is that's unfathomable. That's just to take a life is not nice.
Yeah.
You know, to steal a cigarette is not nice. This is
go.
magnitudes of difference.
So, okay. For Adam, no character witnesses were called whatsoever. They read out a report from Ashraf Jadar, who's a psychiatrist who assessed in Falkenberg, who said he showed no signs of homophobia. He has a gay brother by the name of Dirk, and there was no animosity between the two of them. He experienced learning difficulties and he was bullied as a child. But according to him, he expressed remorse and found it hard to reconcile his actions. We'll get back to that.
Okay.
They were sentenced on March the 16th, 2024, with the court filled with family members, media, and the public. And both accused entered silently from holding cells. Judge Erasmus said that the sentencing is the most difficult part for any judge because basically, in that moment, he holds the one human holds the life of another human in his hands. But he understands that it needs to be done. There has to be a balance between victim justice, constitutional rights of the defendants, and societal interest.
Right.
But he called the crime premeditated, well-planned, unparalleled savagery. And he said it was extremely callous and gruesome. Another masterpiece understatement.
Yeah.
He rejected the claims of remorse, saying that they weren't genuinely remorseful. They were just feeling sorry for themselves.
Yeah, they got caught.
And he reiterated the court cannot prescribe parole eligibility, but he requested that his remarks that they should never see the outside of a prison cell should be formally placed into parole board records. That was the most he could do.
What? Sorry.
So yeah, he couldn't say a whole life order. Now I am a firm believer in the UK's whole life order.
Yeah.
If you kill one person, fine, maybe. If you show rehabilitation, sure, fine. But if you kill 9 fucking people, you shouldn't be coming out. I'm sorry.
Here. Can I ask how, as the verdict rippled out, what was the feeling in Cape Town and what was the feeling in the nation as people came to grips with all of this, watched the story unfold, watched Quentin unmask himself very bravely? Where was public opinion? Where were the minds of the nation in general?
I think, speaking for myself, I remember following the case, and when the guilty verdicts was read out, when it was reported on, I thought, yes, but it didn't feel, for me personally, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like closure, because there were so many unanswered questions, and also because I had my suspicions regarding one of the conspiracy theories that has lingered around. I didn't feel that justice was served fully, because I didn't then, and I don't now, believe that everybody involved was brought to justice. Most people, normal society, they went, oh, okay, fine. They went to prison. Fine. Yeah. Okay, we're all good.
Yeah.
Let's now not talk about the fact that these were sex workers, because that's icky.
Right.
And then I feel that the family, somebody went to prison. Somebody was held accountable for the loss of their loved one. And I don't blame them for going, all right, I need to put the trial behind me.
Yeah.
Because I need to remember my loved one. I need to remember the good times, rather than having to be browbeaten by the horrors that they went through in their final hours.
Yeah, I get it.
So it's one of the reasons why I don't want to. I've often wondered if I were able to speak to the family, or go to the prison and speak to the perpetrators. Would I do it? And no, I don't think so. I wouldn't want to scratch open old wounds for the family. One of the mothers, a mother of one of the victims, actually emailed me after I released my podcast, and she said, you got stuff wrong, and we actually had a decent back and forth between her and I. And then she put me in touch with her daughter, and I actually interviewed her daughter on my podcast.
Wow.
Her daughter now lives in Canada. But they approached me, and I felt that was, I didn't feel like I was encroaching on them, but trying to be all paparazzi-ish, because I don't want that. So, like I said, I feel that I feel that we were that justice wasn't served entirely, but that's on me. That's my personal opinion.
Gotcha.
So they were sentenced to life imprisonment for 9 of the murders, 20 years for attempted murder, 15 years for robbery with aggravating circumstances, 3 years for unlawful possession of firearms, 2 years for unlawful possession of ammunition, and Trevor got an additional 5 years for the theft of the second firearm that he got for Adam. Because they got a life sentence in South Africa, if you get a life sentence, every single other sentence you get is served concurrently. It is another one of those, what the?
Right. These are lives.
Yes.
Lives.
I do not understand why multiple life sentences have to be served concurrently.
Nor do I.
It makes no sense. From the public gallery, there was audible gasps as the sentences were read out. And once it was all said and done, there was a lot of joy and a lot of tears.
Yeah. Wow.
Trevor was very emotional. and he turned and just basically held his hands out for cuffing.
Yeah.
Adam, however, sat motionless, no emotion whatsoever. Quentin left the courtroom, left the courthouse, got outside, and raised both his arms. And he told the media that justice has been served, and he is ecstatic that they'll never see the outside again. Trevor's brother, however, also spoke to the media and claimed that the police didn't investigate the case properly. He hinted at third-party involvement, but he refused to elaborate, saying anything about that is dangerous.
Mm-hmm. That's an Easter egg.
Yeah. As the police van pulled out of the courthouse to take them back to Pollsmoor, members of the public chased the van and pounded against the windows as a final outburst of anger and vindication.
Mm-hmm.
And that is all we heard for, well, should have been the end of the story.
Right.
In 2008, Trevor Tace died in prison due to heart-related complications. No formal public statement was issued by the correctional services at the time when he died, and his family was very worried about his grave being made public because they didn't want it to be vandalized.
Sure.
Adam Woest, however, is alive and well, I suppose he's alive and still I feel not entirely sane, but that's my personal opinion. And he applied for parole in March 2016. It was denied due to him showing a lack of remorse. Apparently, he was diagnosed with schizo personality disorder while in prison, and he failed to complete required psychotherapy and the victim offender dialogue process, which is basically where he meets with either the victim or the victim's families, and they have some sort of "I fucked up, sorry" moment.
Yeah, some basic remorse and regret.
Yeah.
And facing the family. Anyways, yeah.
So in 2023, finally, the victim offender dialogue was held at Nkosi Mampuru prison in Pretoria. Lee Fisser, the sister of Warren, was in attendance. She actually speaks about it in Nicole's book, where she said that he didn't really give much. Apparently, Woest admitted to having always wanted to kill, but he also tried to blame the victims, claiming that Sizzlers was involved in criminal activity and he needed to stomp it out.
I'm speechless. I don't know what to say.
His lack of remorse obviously caused outcry here in South Africa. Like,
good.
Why are we even considering parole for this guy?
Right.
The parole board recommended against release,
Good.
But the final decision remains with the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services. At the moment, he is still in prison, but it's pretty much a foregone conclusion that he will get out.
When do you think that will be?
Anytime in the next 5 years.
So, within 25 years of the crime or the conviction.
Yeah. He will be back on the street.
How old a man will he be?
And even though he will be required for the rest of his days to report to report to parole officers. The amount of crime in South Africa that's committed by released convicts it's shocking. I don't feel enough is done either to rehabilitate or to keep those who are unrehabilitatable in prison. I don't feel enough has been done for this. So, yeah.
Can you remind me how old he was at the time of the crime?
I think he was 26.
26.
I think he was
he's
26.
Still a young man.
Yeah.
Well, youngish. Wow.
If memory says he was 26, Trevor, I think, was 47 or 48.
Young is a relative term, but he could have 20 years, 20 to 30 years of walking around, living life.
Well, back in 2003, I was 26. Yeah, I was also 26. And so he would be, if he was 26, like I believe he is, he would be my age now. I still have a full life ahead of me after this.
Right.
I'm not going to walk out. I'm not going to walk out of the door of the studio and die tomorrow, unless something unfortunate happens. Right. But I have a long life ahead of me. I have a kid I can watch grow up. I can still achieve a lot.
It's just one of those inequities that everybody struggles with. It's crazy.
So yes. Okay. We are running very low on time, so let's wrap this very, very quickly. Lee Pfister has become a prominent advocate opposing his parole. She's criticized the Department of Correctional Services for poor communication with victims' families. She said that some families are not even informed of parole hearings, and that victim impact statements were reportedly mishandled or entirely excluded. Quinton, being the only survivor of the Sizzlers Massacre, he has remained vocal and active in public discourse. He has strongly opposed Woest parole and even and also signed Lee Pfister's petition that she started to present to the Minister of Corrections, and he is currently working on an autobiography called A Life Redeemed, the story of the Sizzlers Massacre survivor. He has put out an appeal for support and funding. So I would be very interested in getting his story firsthand. Unfortunately, we stay far away from each other, and so I've never actually been able to meet him personally. But I don't know if I would want to, because of scratching open old wounds.
Right.
Yeah. It's one thing writing your own book, but when you have someone going, tell me about, I would feel I'd feel awkward. And then of course there was Nicole Engelbrecht's book, Sizzlers, The Hate Crime That Tore Seapoint Apart, which I was actually interviewed for. So I felt very honored to be able to contribute to this book, and it's a brilliant read. What I like about this book is it actually focuses on the parole process, not so much the murders. So it's a different take on the book, on the case. It's been widely praised for emotional depth and clarity.
Yeah, Nicole is very good. I met her when we did our last series.
Yes. She actually inspired me to start A Crime Most Queer. So there are two more clips from interviews that I would like to actually play. The first one is from Elsabe, where she speaks about her views on the crime.
Oh, it was definitely premeditated. By that time, I already had enough experience as a journalist and in court and crime that it was premeditated. They came with rope, with knives, with guns. I think one or two guns, one gun, I'm not sure, with balaclavas, which they never used, with petrol, obviously. But the thing that didn't convince me that this was a so-called robbery, it wasn't, is that they stayed for 3 hours, and that they, and the tape that they bound the men in, putting socks in their mouths, that they couldn't scream, binding them, and why stay for 3 hours? Obviously premeditated. There's just no way. And why not use a balaclava? So if you don't want to be recognized, but you have the balaclava, but you don't use it, why? It doesn't make sense. And then pouring petrol over them to enhance the experience of torture or angst, that at any time you could be set alight, but you're tied. And they were hog-tied. It was definitely premeditated.
So yes, if a hardened reporter can say, their bullshit story is exactly that, there was no question that it was planned. Maybe not brilliantly, but it was planned. There was intent.
Yeah.
One thing I do want to close with is Nick Nevin's experience, a discussion with a family member of the arresting officer.
So whenever I hear about the case, it just kind of brings me back to the type of individual that was capable, or individuals that were capable of performing that level of devastation on that kind of a scale. It's interesting because I was involved at the UCT Department of Biomedical Forensics a couple of years ago. When I say a couple, probably around 2015, 2016, and I met a forensic anthropologist whose husband is a detective, and she told me that he actually was one of the arresting officers on that case. Somehow the case was speaking about it, and I said I never really found out much about it. I didn't really hear about the court case, and I inquired about, did they ever have like a motive, or was it just pure sort of, in my opinion, psychopathy? I mean, I don't know if they were ever tested, etc., or hate crime kind of thing. And she told me that the motive was robbery, and I just remember thinking, no way. Not from a personal perspective, from my opinion, this was not just a robbery gone wrong. I've been to many robberies. I've been to many robberies gone wrong, where people have shot their way out for fear of, reprisal or being recognized. Never have I seen a robbery gone wrong where they took the time to tie everyone up, line them up the way they did, slit their throats and shoot them in the back of the head. So to me, it was a reach that they might have wanted to rob the place at the same time, but the type of person that could perpetuate that kind of violence on that many people, and there's, in my opinion, certainly something very cold, very, very calculated about the way it had happened. And that takes me back again to the feeling that I felt that morning when I got home, the vulnerability that I felt, almost fear that no one is safe with people like that in the world.
So yeah.
Hate.
That is the silence we're left with. That is the shadow that still hangs over Sizzlers. It's been 22 years. And yet, there are a lot of unanswered questions. The judge actually said there are a lot of unanswered questions, and that's the most frustrating part. I have a theory that I want to get into, but I think what I'm going to do is you and I can chat about that privately, and we can post our conversation to Patreon. So if you aren't following us on Patreon, please do go over there. In the next couple of days, I will drop Derek and my conversations on the mastermind conspiracy, which is something that I personally believe very firmly.
I'm going to need to hear more about that.
Yes. I was 1,000 kilometers away when it happened, but I had just left the industry, and these were my people. Okay. I don't deny the fact that I was a rent boy, and the first person to jump to the defense of people who are sex workers, because that's not all they are. And I may have been far from the scene, but I was there in every way that mattered. So yeah, I will keep telling these stories. I will keep speaking their names, and I'm just really, really, really grateful that you came along with me on this journey. We've done 3 episodes on this case, and next time I will be joined by a new co-host. I have really appreciated you coming along with me as I speak about Sizzlers, where you can give, where you could give an international perspective and ask the questions that people who are not from South Africa could ask. And I really appreciate that you have, that you've allowed me to say their names.
Well, look, work commitments are taking me in a different direction right now, but NJ, I did want to say that this is such good and important work, and you are such a good and important storyteller. You are an important voice, and that to me is a voice for the victims. And I admire your work, and I admire you.
Thank you. I'm really, really grateful for you. Had it not been for you, this would never have come to pass. I would never have found the balls to get on camera live on my own.
Wow.
And I'm really grateful. And I look forward to when you come back to visit, or come back full time. I'm really
love it.
I cannot wait to see you back on the channel. But thank you.
I'd love that. Thank you.
Okay, so like I said, we're going to be coming into the Mastermind Conspiracy over on Patreon. That'll probably go up either tomorrow or over the weekend. And yeah, we will be back in 2 weeks' time with my new co-host, and I can't wait to see you guys. Thank you. Thank you to Derek. Thank you to Amy in the control room, and see you next time.